what I thought I was actually going to do the downturned fella and the plain hemmer. And then I thought, "Ah, I feel like something a little bit more creative tonight." So I am going to talk to you about quilting on the serger and cover and chain, because if you've never done it, I think you'd be super surprised how efficient it is for that purpose. And I think there's a lot of serious quilters out there that think that, that's a terrible thing to say, to use your serger, but why not? Why not? And I would beg them just to give it a try, because I think they'd be surprised. So why do I like using the serger? It's one of those things. I say serger. If I'm using the serger, I'm going to be doing 3-thread overlock, which I will do for some things, and I'll tell you what. But also chain stitch. Chain stitch is brilliant. Okay, but that's a cover and chain function. So when I say serger, I'm meaning cover and chain and serger. So the reason I like it is it's super efficient. Okay, it the serger cover stitch machine has way bigger feed dogs than a sewing machine, and it feeds the fabric in and it feeds the fabric out. On a sewing machine, it pulls it. Okay, so if I'm doing something that is on the bias, like flying geese or something like that, um, it's got a tendency to stretch even as a woven, but it certainly helps to have more feet. And if I'm really having a problem, which I can do if I'm laying a decorative stitch down on the edge, I will use my differential feed. So, that's an option you've got. So I've said the feed dogs are twice as big. The Surges is a straight stitch machine, so it's brilliant at doing straight. Okay, it wants to go straight. It doesn't so much like curves. We do gentle curves, but it's quite hard to do a tight curve or circle on the serger. I've got some ideas for that, and we'll cover that another time. But that makes it really good for piecing. So it's super fast and you get a clean finish, and the machine doesn't eat the points. It doesn't eat the piece of fabric, because remember the serger and cover stitch, well, the serger lays down its stitch. The cover stitch is more like a sewing machine in the way it feeds, but it still doesn't eat the corners like you can do on a sewing machine, unless you've got straight stitch plate. So I have to say that I use both 3-thread overlock and I use chain stitch. And the chain stitch is the one that I think is really great for sort of more complex piecing. So that's Flatlock. Of course, I use Flatlock too. So here I've done a log cabin, and I've done it all with chain stitch. And what I like, do you know the best thing about chain stitch is if I sew something on a quilt, maybe a binding on or something like that, and it's not quite right, it's super easy to undo. So I don't think to myself, oh, I'll leave that, nobody will notice. I think, oh, I'll undo it and do it again. And it's just a question of pulling the thread and it comes undone, which of course is what puts a lot of people off, that they don't want it just coming undone. But my point is, if you lock your stitches, in other words, if you're doing chain stitch, if you have a thread chain at the beginning and a thread chain at the end, then your stitches are locked, unless you cut off all the thread chains. And eventually you will, when you come to other sections where you cross over, you will cut those thread chains. But all the while you have those stitches are locked, so there's no reason it should come undone. And I did the Bloom and Grow quilt. I did a lot of chain stitching on that. I didn't have a single seam come undone, but then I locked all my stitches. So I particularly like that, as I say, particularly if you're doing something with fine points on it. I'm looking around to see if I've got anything with fine points. Well, I've got points on this, but I used a chain stitch, and it worked out perfectly. So quite often I use a chain stitch, particularly if I want to open my seam and press my seam open. So chain stitch is probably the one I use the most, but I'm not opposed to using 3-threaded overlock either. So let me just get to that bit. Oh, How do you know 1/4 inch? Well, let me just tell you that when I'm using chain stitch, what I do is I use my regular foot. It's a nice big foot. I don't use my chain foot. And if you look at the very front, do you see there's some little notches? Well, if I am using the center chain needle, which I generally do, I find 1/4 inch, a scant 1/4 inch, is just on the notch where the O1 needle would be. So what I do is I feed my fabric in under that notch, and that gives me my perfect 1/4 inch. So pretty, you know, pretty accurate. And it's like everything I say. Everybody looks at needle. Too late when you look at the needle. You've got to look at the feed in. So it gives me a nice mark ahead where I'm feeding in to get that 1/4 inch. Somebody said, just made a top for my granddaughter for college and did it on my serger. Used the serger because I thought it would be a stronger stitch. Wasn't very fancy, just a lot of squares. Ideal, ideal. When using chain stitch to piece, what kind of thread in the needle and looper? I just use regular serger thread. Now, you could use any thread. I tell you another thread I use a lot. Um, I use it. When do I use it? Well, I use it for a lot of things, but I use, I think it's 90 weight. Let me check it. Now that's a thinner thread, so you have to be a bit careful, but I haven't had a problem with it because it's very strong, and that is Invisifil, and it is, I think it's 70. No, that's the number. It's 100. It's 100 weight. So, it's a strong thread if you really want to reduce the amount of thickness in your thread. So let's just cover that too. I just I just used regular thread, but I could use Invisifil if I wanted to make it thinner. Somebody said, I love using the lace applicator for an even seam allowance. Absolutely. And also, if you have the new table for the Triumph Ovation, you can use your hem guide. But honestly, I used the notch because it was there and it was ahead and it was in the perfect place. So, Darlene, welcome to your first live show. Right. So I told you that I used the grooves on the front of the foot to find my 1/4 inch. So let's go on to 3-thread overlock. And I do actually have a slideshow. And the reason for that is that sometimes it's easier to see things in a picture. And all the notes that are in here are actually in Deb Canham Serger Sanity projects under files. So if you want to reference something or go back to something or you missed a link to something, it will be in there. So what's great about 3-thread overlock, I think, is the fact that it can sew blocks together. Okay, you can piece with it, but I think it's particularly good for sewing blocks together and for sewing straight line borders in or panels in. And you can see here, this is the back of my Bloom and Grow, and you can see how neat it is. But I want to say that it wasn't just neat, it was very accurate. It was probably more accurate than I've ever managed before. And I think that a lot of that is the fact that I've got that accuracy with the chain stitch and the 1/4 inch and the 3-thread overlock. And I don't trim my fabric when I'm doing a 3-thread overlock. I'm just running the raw edge along the front of the knife. So just kissing the knife. But you can see how neat it is, how tidy. It's so unusual for me. So yes, I really enjoyed that. And and people always say to me, when you came to quilting, did you find it too thick? I did not. I did not. Okay. So so that's 3-thread overlock. I just want to say, I'm just going to go on to the next slide because it kind of helps that you can add a splash of color. This is a variegated thread, and I used it in the chain looper and I used 3 triple cover stitch. Okay, and it just adds a splash of color. So what I want to do is take this out for the minute and just show you what I mean. On my Bloom and Grow, I use quite strong colors, and at the bottom somewhere there's an orange section, and I felt there was too much I will get that bit in a minute. This quilt is much bigger than you think. So just found a loose thread. So do you see those orange sections? I felt that was quite a big amount of orange. So what I did was I just used triple cover and sewed from the wrong side, and I just put that decorative color curvy line down it just to break up the color a bit. So, I haven't really gone on about decorative on the serger quite yet, but I just wanted to cover the basics, i.e. piecing and sewing blocks and borders on and things. I'm going to get on to a bit more decorative stuff. So yes, any questions on that? I find it all worked very well. Somebody said they used the lace applicator for, yes, absolutely. You can certainly use that, set that up. I used to use that a lot. Now I tend to do it. You do different things for a while and then you change on to something else. But yes, I did used to use my lace applicator for a lot for that. So I'm just going to add that back to the stage because I've mentioned that. I want to go on about decorative stitching. So we have talked about the utilitarian, using chain stitch, using 3-thread overlock. Oh, on that subject, I know some of my educator friends prefer 4-thread overlock, and they reckon it flattens the seam more. And I think that's worth considering. I don't use it, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't or you couldn't, or it's not a choice that can be made. So you could also use 4-thread. I just prefer not to have quite as much thread. And I think if I was using a sewing machine, I don't sew it twice. Like with the 4-thread overlock, you get 2 rows of straight stitch, and I think I only need one. Of course, I might use it more for something like a t-shirt quilt, but that's another story. So here we have the quilt I designed a few years ago. It's called the serger quilt, very original. It's a lot of fun, and the idea of it was just to use decorative stitching, but instead of having the decorative stitch having well, it's, instead of sewing it like you normally do, where the stitching doesn't show, you're going to show all the stitching on this quilt, and I think it's quite nice. Um, I have to say, I don't think it's a cuddly quilt because you've got all that texture, but I tended to use decorative rayons and dazzly threads. So if I was going to make that for a quilt for somebody to actually use, I would consider using something like cotton, like eleganza, wonderful eleganza, which is soft, or other threads that are soft. These aren't particularly, or at least not when they're stitched close together like I've done them. Right. So yes, somebody said that. I just saw that. Somebody said I use 4-thread when doing quilts on my serger. I like the insurance of the second line stitching. And I use the M on the stitch width dial and get my 1/4 inch seam. Absolutely. If you're doing serger stitches, you can use the M. If you're using chain stitch, then use that notch on your regular foot to help you. Okay, so thanks, Mary. I was going to show you my quilt. It's here. I knew it wasn't far away. So you can see in the pictures, I have used 3-thread overlock. I have used Flatlock wave, and I've actually used a lot of Flatlock. Flatlock to me is the perfect quilting stitch. So I'm just going to take this out for a second while I show you my quilt. So it's not huge. Of course, you could make it bigger just by adding to it. But it was fun. And I just used a jelly roll. I'm sure I did. I just used a jelly roll for this. And of course, it's K facet, but it's fun. So let's go on to, and if the pattern's available on my website, if you buy it, it gives you links to some videos so that you can have help sewing it. But let's go back to the slideshow because I really want to talk about my favorite stitch, which is Flatlock stitch. And the reason I love Flatlock stitch for quilting is that it pulls flat. It's thinner than any sewing machine could make or anything. It's Flatlock stitch. It pulls flat. So you really don't have any bump in the seam at all. And the only thing about it is you are going to see the stitch. And the stitch you're seeing here, if you look, that is like a little rungs on a ladder, and that's where I put 8-weight decorative thread in the needle, and it creates this stitch. And in this particular picture, I've used a variegated eleganza by Wonderful. And as I said, it goes in the needle, but it's absolutely my favorite stitch for sewing strips together. If I have to sew a load of strips together, that's how I do it. And I use it a lot in my projects. So the other thing that's nice about decorative stitches is you can actually finish the edge. Now, this is a wave stitch, Flatlock. No, this is a wave stitch. It's not Flatlock, it's wave. And it makes a pretty edging. It saves the aggravation of binding, but of course, it's not as soft as a binding. I have to say that. I used 8-weight dazzle in turquoise and orange, and that's quite a thick thread. But it does look pretty, and it certainly looks pretty on something like a table runner. And we don't all have to make quilts, but we still have to bind edges and things. So interesting. So, and another stitch that I don't know if it comes into quilting so much, but it's certainly an edge stitch on blankets and things. And I have it on this little jacket. And I'm sure I've shown you this 100 times. I've got to do something new. But that's a really nice finish on a fleece blanket or something like that. So again, that's done on the serger. And if you look at that slide, and don't forget you get the notes, it's got a link to a video on YouTube. And that is one I did on how to set up your machine and how to actually do blanket stitch. So remember, if you're looking for my YouTube videos, it's confusing. Like everything I do is confusing. I know it goes with me. But you have to look under Deborah Canham with Dborah. Canham. And that's where you find a lot of the videos that I'm taking from the lives, editing them and putting them on YouTube. And I try to take them out of the live section when I do it so that I know I've done it. But you will find them all up there. And there's lots up there. I just got more to do. That's all. So bindings on the serger, there's a great subject. Even if I did make a quilt on a sewing machine, I would absolutely use the serger to bind it. And the way I do that is that I cut my bindings, I sew them on, and in my lower looper, I use a fusible uninfused thread. So when I've finished, I can just turn the binding and press it, and my binding stays in place. Now, of course, I still have to sew it. I generally do hand stitch mine down, but you could also use a sewing machine, but it gives a beautiful, perfect binding. And I know a lot of you will be asking me more questions on that. And I have again on YouTube, bindings on the serger with perfect miter corners. Okay, so that's another free live that's up on Deborah Canham on YouTube, and you can watch that. So I didn't want to take up all of tonight with that. So more about bindings. I have a class that you pay for. It's not an expensive one, and it just gives you different techniques on creative bindings on the serger. So things that the serger can do for you, when it comes to quilting. So the top left, I actually did the rabbit in IQ on the Solaris, but the binding there, I think you can see, it's so small I can't see it. Anyway, but I tell you what, I've got it here, so I know what I'm doing. This one has wave stitch flange in it, okay? And then it's bound using the fusible thread in the back. But I'll show you that closer up in a minute. And then the next one, I actually did prairie points, and I'll show you that in a minute. And the next one to that is just how I do the bindings. And it tells you how to do it in this class. And it also has more on flanges, and actually that's a frame. And lastly, it tells you how to put beading on. Oh, a cording. Where's my cording one? Oh, well, that isn't there. Isn't that typical? Oh, yes, it is. So that's that one. And then cording. And what I'll do is I'll take the slideshow down and show you those a bit closer. So let's do that. I haven't got many questions. Are you all still there? Yes, you're still there. I thought you'd all gone. Right, so this is the one with cording. Super, super, super easy. You're just going to put cording, make your cording using your cording foot, and then you just sew it in with the binding when you sew the binding on. So super, super easy. Okay. The beading, the beading is just added to the overall quilt. Hang on, it's the wrong way up. And using the beading foot. And I have a video on that too. You'll find that probably on YouTube too. But the only thing I'd say to that is make sure you don't use too big of beads because they get in the way of the upper looper. This one I've used decorative thread to make two different flanges. The rainbowy one is 3 thread narrow, and the one at the top is wave stitch. Okay. And this one, I put prairie points in, but actually I also, and this is another thought, which I have covered, I'm sure. Well, it's certainly in this class. And that is using your knit woven double fold bias binder to put your bindings on. So how super fast and easy is that? And some of you make charity quilts and things like that. This would be perfect. So you just put the binding on and you can sew the whole thing and it's secured, sewn top and bottom perfectly. And there you are. Problem is, can't miter the corners. You have to have excess binding and then fold it. And then let me show you the back because I forgot to put the lining on the back of this block. So now you get to see my folds. So what I did was I just folded over that corner and try and line it up with the binding and it looks a whole lot better. And just stitch it down. So you just have to hand stitch four corners rather than anything else. So, the serger does do a tremendous amount to help you with quilting. Tremendous amount. Let me see what else I had to say on it. I told you about those classes. Oh, yes. So let's go back to the slideshow. And so I made the Bloom and Groom quilt. Bloom, Bloom and Groom. Bloom and Grow quilt. And this is from Benina, and it's only available through your Benina dealer. It's designed by Amanda Murphy, but please don't contact her. She doesn't sell the pattern, Benina do. And it comes as a kit as well, and it also has a pattern, and it also has an online class run by Benina. So, and if you buy their new Quilters edition serger combo machine, you get the pattern and the kit. But this can actually be made on any serger, okay? And it's a fun sew, and I've just done it. So here's my one, and you can see I can't get far enough back to hold up the one I have done, which is here, because it's actually much longer than you think it's going to be. So I've got a picture of it here, and you can see I used all bright colors on mine because I like bright colors, but I enjoyed it, and I keep saying it. I very rarely use blue. I'm actually just making something else in blue, so things change. So I wanted to keep the how I chose my colors. I wanted to keep the shapes of the blocks. Okay, it's very easy, especially if you're like me and you want to use a pattern on everything. It's very easy to lose the shape of the blocks. So, for instance, the tumbler blocks at the bottom, the orange ones, and the flying geese next up. The yellow is just it's wonky log cabin, and I did mine totally improv. And then you can see you've got bow tie and then some other blocks and some strip stuff at the top. But you see, I've mixed lots of colors in, but I actually didn't make it wasn't that complex to choose because I chose 4 solid colors. Okay, and the fabrics are oh, I can't remember the name of them. They're the ones that aren't all one color. They have the other colors mixed in. Can't remember. But anyway, I like them because they're not all the same color and they have other colors. Solids kind of frighten me. But so I chose 4 solid colors and then I just pulled out of my scraps the colors to go in the quilt. And it worked really well. And of course, eventually I ran out. It's grunge. Thank you. Thank you for rescuing me. Thank you. The solids are grunge. The I pulled out fabrics in my stash, and of course, I ran out of them, so I had to bring others in. But you can see that I basically started with 4 solid colors. And then as long as the fabrics went with my solids, my pattern fabrics went with my solids, I was good. So that's how I decided. And then you'll also notice it's quite a small picture for me, but I used black and white above and below the wonky cabins. And the reason for that was there was a lot of color, a lot of activity. It was charging around. And by using black and white, I kind of fence it in so it doesn't contaminate everything above and below it. So I did put 2 borders of black and white in there just to contain the all the colors in the wonky cabin. I love wonky cabin. It always makes me happy. I love it. I get excited every strip I add. So that was basically my colors for that. Let me see if I say anything else. How I choose my colors. Colors, I just love colors. I love patterns, but I'm learning to love solids. You know, it's just a question of using them. You know, that's the point. I, as you know, I don't really like blues, but I've just started another. This one's all improv because that's really what I like best. And I had a jelly roll of blues, so I'm using that. And you know, you think to yourself, what colors could I use? I could add in, and that's the trouble. I could add in any color, you know. So I just start off slowly, and I definitely want to use a dark. I use what I've got. I want to use a very dark turquoise and a mid turquoise, and so this mint green. I just think it's a pretty contrasting color, and actually it goes with one of the colors in here if I can find it. This blue spot here, it's the same color as that. So that kind of tells me it's safe to combine the two. I mean, it could have been pink. I'm going to try and stay off the pink. I'm going to try and make pink the accent. I might just do a small binding in it or something like that, but I'm trying to stay off the pink. So I want it to be cool colors because I have a room upstairs and I have a chair and I want to put a quilt on it, but I want cool colors. So that's why I'm stepping away from my warms and using cool, just not green. Absolutely. Shot cotton. Yes, I do have some shot cotton. Yes, I do have, and it does go nicely with it. Solids scare me. You got that right. You know, isn't that the truth? I mean, it's like if you give me a blank piece of paper and say, draw a picture of a bird, I find it terrifying. But if you give me a piece of fabric and you say stitch it out, I can do that. And actually I can draw on fabric. I don't find that as frightening. But I'm happier if it's not plain. If there's something in the background, just like as I say, grunge has those color variations in it. And that just takes the scariness of it being a solid. So yes, I know I'm strange. So yes, do I have any questions on the quilting? You know, I'm always interested. I know some of you are serious quilters. You know, I'm not. I'm not a quilter. Oh, let me show you something else I've got. Oh, yes. So, you know, I was telling you, this is actually what I'm doing with that green and blue. But do you see, I'm doing it slightly different in the middle. I quite like that, but I'm doing it different in the middle. Um, but yeah, lots of different colors. And again, grunge. So, yes. Thank you. Thank you. Joey says we love you anyway. Thank you. Yes. Love the star. Yeah, that's what I'm doing in the blue and the green. So quite different. And it's just that thing of the strips. I just love it when you put strips in using the flatlock stitch. That's the word I wanted. The reason I stopped myself there was I noticed something about this one. I tried to keep all my blocks. Oh no, I think it's the same. Yeah, no, it's the same. Don't worry. I'm over it. And you know, I only added the circles because there was too much plain solid in there. But this time round, I've actually used circles in the print, and that will kind of help me not to feel I have to fill it. So we'll see how that goes. But you haven't asked me any questions about quilting, so I hope if you have a baby lock, can you still purchase a mini quilt pan? Yes, if you go to Benina store and ask them for the quilt pattern, they won't ask you which machine you have. So yes, and you can certainly sew on any machine. Kay says she loves her grunge. Yeah, I do too. So yes, are the circles difficult? Oh, the circles on this one. Well, you know me. I mean, I always moan about doing things easy, and then I get a sudden attack of oh, I've got to do this perfectly, you know. So these are actually I make my circles over paper templates. I gather them and then I press them, then I take the paper out and then I hand stitch them on. But you see, I quite like hand stitching. Find it quite soothing. Now, as I get older, I did do an applique quilt earlier this year, and I just found it really hard on my eyes. So I don't, I've got another one where I just sewed the circles. Oh, this one behind me. This one, I decided not to be so. Let's get this. This is the same pattern, just in a table runner. And this one, I just cut the circles and fused them on. And then I sewed round them using my Invisifil because I really like that for stitching down with a zigzag stitch because it's not very obvious. So I'll hold it closer and then perhaps you can see it. See, it's not very, you can't really see it. So yeah. So this one I did just fuse them on. And it, really doesn't look any different, does it? Don't know why I get my funny patches of having to hand sew. But I like this. I haven't released it as a pattern yet, but I will when I get to it. And it has a cushion as well, but I don't know where that is. So right. I think that is all AccuQuilt. How do you cut the shapes? AccuQuilt. What the circles? I I have one of those stencily things. It's a green piece of plastic and it's got lots of circles on it. And I just choose which size I'm going to cut and I draw it, then I cut it, then I gather the edge over a paper template. So, and I often do that when I'm in hotels when I'm traveling. Something to keep me busy. Okay, well, I'm surprised you didn't ask me more questions about the stitching. Maybe you're just going to give it a go and see. But I think you'll love it, and I really do feel that if you're a quilter and you really feel that it's not for you, just give it a try and then tell me what you think. Looks like you quilted first and then added the circles after. I sometimes do. I sometimes do. I didn't with this one. This one, if you look on the back, no, I did. I quite often quilt and add the circles because I can't bother to go around them. So yes, this one I quilted after the circles. You see the circles. So yeah, good, Jane. I'm glad you're going to give it a go. I honestly think you'll enjoy it. I think, the thing that impresses me most is how accurate it is. How I can get it so perfect. And when I'm using three thread overlock and I'm coming and I'm matching up blocks and things, I have one turn one way, one turn the other, and they sit in with each other and they're just so easy to match up. So I do think it's fabulous. Did you do the quilting on the sewing machine? No, I have a sit down long arm and I love it. It's my kind of Zen machine, and I have lots of plans for it. I haven't done that much with it, but I did use that for it, and I really enjoyed it. And I used rulers for the first real time. I had some rulers, and I did that. And that was super fun. If you haven't used rulers either on a long arm or a sewing machine, then I tell you, it is really cool. And again, it just flows. It goes on. Originally, I thought I'm not going to like rulers. I just want to do free motion, but I like to use the rulers and then do free motion in it too. I like free motion still, but I changed my mind on the rulers as you do. You try something that you don't think you're going to like and you do. On the big flower on Bloom and Grid, did you quilt the background first and then add the flower? No, I added the flower and then I quilted. The last thing I did on the Bloom and Grow was quilt, and it took me a while. And I just did a meander around the flower. I'm not very good at meandering. And that's another thing. Meandering is more terrifying than just doing free motion. It's because you have to change direction all the time, and I get kind of panic struck. So yeah, you see my meander. But a lot of that was I just used a straight ruler really, and it was kind of cool. I liked it. Somebody says, I'm curious if you serged the bloom and grow on the L890 or which serger you use. Out of respect, because it was a Bonina pattern, I used my Bonina because that was the right thing to do. So, yep. But you could do it on any machine. I'm having trouble with the flying geese. Hmm. Are you using a chain stitch? I did have one where I lost the point at the end slightly, but only one, and I could have fixed it. I just didn't notice until I'd sewn them all together. Don't worry, there's so much in these quilts, you don't see one thing that's wrong unless somebody tells everybody like I just did. Frank Frankly Foster says, "S see pretty, meandering and solids are very scary." Yes, I think so. I think meandering, just too much changing direction. No law saying you can't cross over stitches when meandering. No, but I gave myself that law. When I was a kid, there was a poem, and it's you mustn't tread on the lines when you walk in London streets, and otherwise the bears will get you. And my mother always used to say it to me. We walked to the streets of London, and when I became a police officer in London, I spent a lot of time walking the streets. And even as a grown up, I tried not to step on the lines. So things stay with you, I think. Yes, as the pattern shows, but trouble pulling the points through. I'm not quite understanding that. I'm not quite understanding that. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think Marion says she's glad that I honored the pattern and the machine. I always try and do the right thing. Then I sleep well at night. So anyway, I think that's all for today, and I really hope you give it a try because it's so much fun. I wouldn't have, felt so strongly about sharing it with you if it wasn't that using the serger to quilt and piece is just super fun, fast, easy, and accurate. So think about it and let me know how you go. Okay, so I will see you next week. I might do the downturn fellas next week. Am I offering a serger quilt class? No, not at this stage. I have got my improv table runner that I might do. I am working on an improv quilt. You know me, I like improv because I don't like rules. So I'm happy to do that. We'll see how it comes out. If you all like it, I'll be happy to teach a class on it. So, anyway, you all have a great week, and I will see you next Monday. Take care. Bye. And thanks for coming in and joining me. I nearly forgot to say that.